She's a mogul who got her start not in China, but on Wall Street. But she missed the Great Wall, so she went back home and made it big. The mogul, Jiang Xin, is the fifth richest self-made billionaire woman in the world.
This is us, but the one outside, that one is us.
She's pointing out her buildings. With her partner husband, she has built more of Beijing than almost any emperor in China's history. How many buildings have you and your husband built?
Oh,
You can't even count them, right? Wherever you look, you see the company logo, Soho China, on one cutting-edge skyscraper after the next. As a developer, Xin pays special attention to design, which is why she's been called the Steve Jobs of the architecture world. Her buildings are fluid and futuristic and daring, and would be at home in New York or London, an expression of China's emergence into the modern world. I'm wondering, when you see these buildings, if it ever strikes you, you are designing Beijing. It's a huge responsibility.
I feel that. I really do feel
it
that.
on your shoulder.
Oh, yeah, I feel that. I feel these buildings are forming the face of our city.
And you build huge buildings and huge projects.
That's China, you know. China, if you think about what is the character of China, it's enormous scale, it's bigness, everything.
She took us to the site of her newest project.
Do you love to come out? I love coming out.
That's so huge, it's swarming with thousands of workers. These kinds of projects are one reason for China's explosive economic growth. Recently, though, there have been fears of overbuilding and a real estate bubble. Xin told us that's why she keeps her focus narrow. Only office buildings, and only in Beijing and Shanghai.
My own view is that residential property development in China has really come to an end.
You don't feel that there's any threat of a bursting bubble in commercial real estate in Beijing and Shanghai?
I think in retail, like shops, shopping malls, there is oversupply. But office is the only property sector that's doing well.
Even though the future may be uncertain.
The future may be uncertain in terms of, well, the future is always uncertain wherever you
more
go.
uncertain now.
Even if the certainty is not 10% growth for China, it goes down to 7% growth, it's still a better place to spend your money.
You think?
I think so.
You have that much faith?
That's why we're investing heavily.
Her business instincts are usually right. They've made her enormously wealthy and a celebrity here. When she opens a new building, it can look like a Hollywood premiere. Yet at 47, she remains grounded and unpretentious, never forgetting she grew up wretchedly poor. She says her personal story shows that China is the new land of opportunity.
China is the place that produces more self-made billionaires than any other country in the world.
Do you know what the American dream is? It sounds like the American dream, doesn't it?
Very much so.
How times have changed. Xin was born during the Cultural Revolution, when Mao Zedong brutally purged all the capitalists and intellectuals whom he derided as running dogs. And if you were educated, you were almost crushed.
My parents were university graduates.
Oh boy, they were in trouble.
They were sent to the countryside. I spent years in the countryside as part of the re-education camp.
But call it the revenge of the running dogs. Their children are today the country's leading capitalists. For Xin, it goes back to when she was 8. Her mother was allowed to return to Beijing, where she found work as a translator. But they were destitute and homeless, forced to sleep in an office.
I remember we would sleep on her desk. We would use her dictionaries, because my mother was a translator, as the pillow.
You slept on the desktop, dictionary as your pillow?
Pillow.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, for months we did that.
When Xin was 14, she moved to Hong Kong in search of work. But life there was just as hard. She was forced to slave away on assembly lines as a sweatshop girl.
On my table, there are like 5 different chips you need to put on the board. Boom, 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 boom. Then you put on the belt, and then the belt goes down to the next one, right? So we all become become like a machine doing that.
So this is how you spent your teenage years?
5 years doing that.
5 years. So do you look upon that as lost years?
No, I mean, I look at those, it's a different chapter in life. I knew that's not the life I wanted to have.
Did you have a dream?
No. I wanted to
Get
just
me
escape.
out of here. Right. So when she had saved enough money, she bought a one-way ticket to London, packed up her bags, and left.
I thought I need to cook for myself, so I carried a wok, a Chinese wok.
In your suitcase?
Yeah.
But forget Chinese food. With no money, she ended up working in a fish and chip stand. Her Dickensian journey wasn't over.
I think I was very afraid in England, only because I had never seen so many Caucasians.
Funny-looking people.
Language I didn't understand, nothing familiar.
You didn't know anybody.
Didn't know anybody. I sat on my suitcase, started crying.
You end up, no one's going to believe this, you end up working at Goldman Sachs. What a tale. From crying and alone to school to learn English, which led to a scholarship to the University of Sussex, and then a master's in economics from Cambridge. It was 1992, and Shin's timing was perfect. China was opening its markets to foreign investors. Goldman Sachs sent the sweatshop girl to the mainland to look for opportunities. But she was unhappy in the world of investment banking. I'll give you some of the quotes that you've said. People spoke crassly, treated others badly, looked down on the poor, and adored the rich. Those are your quotes.
That's pretty much true. I mean, I think the investment banking environment was very competitive and cutthroat. I was always looking for opportunities to leave.
You wanted to come back to China.
I think I was just missing the idealism that I was naively brought up with in the communist, socialist China, when everyone was encouraged and brought up to be idealists. And I guess I was just missing what I was brought up with.
That's when she met the man she would marry, Pan Shi. He was part of a wave of young idealists committed to liberalizing China through business. In his case, through a new industry, real estate.
And I remember he took me to see a construction site. It was evening, it was late at night. He took me, he said, you have to come and see what I do. And I went, wow, I had never seen a hole that big on Earth. And he told me, this is the place will be the Manhattan of Beijing. And I laughed. I thought, because he hasn't been to Manhattan. He had no idea what Manhattan means, right? A whole bunch of factories in the area, big hole on the ground. This is now going to be a Manhattan of Beijing. But this is where we are now. All this area used to be factories.
We stood at that spot in a sea of offices they built. It's not Manhattan. It's bigger. Building after building. Some projects the size of entire neighborhoods. And all built in the last 19 years, going back to the night Shin and Pan first met. Did you really decide to get married in 4 days?
Yeah, we did. And I left my bank, and we joined together, formed the company. With no money, no backing, no relationship. None of us is the sons or the daughters of any Chinese.
He wasn't a princely.
No. In fact, just the opposite. He came from one of the poorest provinces in China, the most impoverished place.
But she and Pan were finding out that mixing how East and West did business was not easy. They fought constantly. And so one day she packed her bags and went back to England. But then she changed her mind.
I thought, I cannot just give up like this. I called him up. I said, you know what? I decided to stay in China, stayed in this marriage. I quit the job. I will step aside. I stay at home.
In her time off, she got pregnant with the first of their 2 sons, while Pan was making a success of the company.
He did so well that it was too much work. He couldn't handle. So then he said, you better come back to work. Really, I need you to work.
Oh, my goodness.
Everything changed from fighting, wanting to get divorced, to starting a family with baby, and the business is going well, and I'm back to work.
Now they split their duties. He focuses on everything inside China. She uses her Wall Street know-how to raise money abroad and hires the world's top architects. Together, they have built Soho China into a company with $10 billion in assets. What about corruption, though?
Corruption is everywhere in China. It's really quite widespread. Pretty much whoever has a power is in the position to be corrupt.
So they expect you to pay them off.
Pay them off.
So how do you operate in this environment?
For instance, if we buy a piece of land, if we buy in an auction, then that's very transparent.
Openness.
Openness.
Right.
The more openness it is, the better it is. We don't need to know anybody. We don't need to be the daughters and sons of anybody. We can just buy with money on an open market. That building will stay, and then the rest is all landscape.
She believes that open market tools like public auctions and transparent accounting will lessen the corruption and the cronyism. The woman who once slept on a dictionary and now has about $3 billion in her bank account may tout China as the new land of opportunity, but she knows it's still not the land of the free.
You know, I hear a lot in the U.S. People praise, in Wall Street, people praise state capitalism in China, and look at how efficient things get done, decisions get made so quick and so effective. It can roll over a policy overnight nationwide. And here in the U.S., we need to go through Congress, Senate, and debate. And
right.
You know, I have to say, for a Chinese living in China, Chinese, if you ask one thing everyone craves for, is what? Not food, not home. Everyone craves for democracy. I know there's a lot of negativities in the U.S. about the political system, but don't forget, 8,000 miles away, people in China are looking at it, longing for it.
Do you think there will be democracy here? Let's say, I'm going to put a time frame on it. In 20 years?
Sooner.
You're an optimist.
I am.
A bold statement in a country with heavy government censorship and limited freedom of speech. And while she is thriving, China's residential real estate is in trouble. That part of the story when we return.
Big superior.
I think it's...
If trouble comes in threes, then what'll be the next global market to melt down after the U.S. and Europe? Some are looking nervously at China. China has been nothing short of a financial miracle. In just 30 years, this state-controlled economy became the world's second largest, deftly managed by government policies and decrees. One sector the authorities concentrated on was real estate and construction. But that may have created the largest housing bubble in human history. If you go to China, it's easy to see why there's all the talk of a bubble. We discovered that the most populated nation on earth is building houses, districts, and cities with no one in them.
So this is Zhengzhou, and we are on the major highway, or the major road, and it's rush hour, and it's almost empty.
Gilliam Tulloch is a Hong Kong-based financial analyst who was one of the first to draw attention to the housing bubble in China. He's showing us around the new eastern district of Zhengzhou in one of the most populated provinces in China. Not that you'd know it. We found what they call a ghost city of new towers with no residents, desolate condos, and vacant subdivisions, uninhabited for miles and miles and miles and miles of empty apartments.
Why are they empty? I've heard that they have actually been sold.
They've all been sold. They've all been
All
sold.
been sold. They're
Absolutely.
Owned by people in China's emerging middle class who now have enough money to invest, but few ways to do it. They're not allowed to invest abroad. Banks offer paltry returns, and the stock market is a roller coaster. But 15 years ago, the government changed its policy and allowed people to buy their own homes, and the floodgates opened.
So what they do is they invest in property because property prices have always gone up by more than inflation.
And they believe it'll always go up.
Yeah, just like they believed in the US.
Actually, property values have doubled, tripled, and more. So people in the middle class have sunk every last penny into buying 5, even 10 apartments, fueling a building bonanza unprecedented in human history. No nation has ever built so much, so fast.
How important is real estate to the Chinese economy? Is it central?
Yes, it's the main driver of growth and has been for the last few years. Some estimates have it as high as 20 or 30% of the whole economy.
But they're not just building housing. They're building cities.
Yes, that's right.
Giant cities being built with people not coming to live here.
Yes, I think they're building somewhere between 12 and 24 new cities every single year.
Unlike our market-driven economy, in China, it's the government that has spent some $2 trillion to get these cities built as a way of keeping the economy growing. The assumption is if you build it, they'll come. But no one's coming.
This is really completely, totally empty, and it goes up.
Gilliam took us to this shopping mall that's been standing vacant for 3 years.
Can I find this all over China?
Yes, you can. They've simply built too much infrastructure too quickly.
But I see KFC behind you.
Yeah.
I see Starbucks over there. I see some other very recognizable American franchises coming in here.
Yeah.
At least does that mean they have faith that this is going to ignite?
No, these are all fake signs. This is to give potential buyers the impression of what it might look like if they moved in.
They're not real. So KFC didn't buy this space or rent this space?
No, they haven't.
Starbucks?
No.
They just put the sign up?
That's right.
It's all make-believe, non-existent supply for non-existent demand.
Look at that. Swarovski, Piaget. They're hoping for high-end, too.
H&M, Zara.
That's all. Potemkin.
Yeah.
It's surreal, and it's everywhere. Like the city of Ordos in Mongolia, built for 1 million people who didn't show up. And no, you're not in England. You're in Thamestown, a development near Shanghai built like an English village.
And it was finished, I think, around 5 or 6 years ago. And it must have cost close to $1 billion US. And you'll see it's still standing there empty.
Well, I've heard that there is some industry there, or some business, one business there.
Marriage.
Wedding pictures. Is that right?
And what's more uplifting than a wedding? Or 10? You can see these empty developments on the edge of almost every city in China.
What about the idea that China is urbanizing? People are flooding into cities, or want to anyway, from the rural areas, by the hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
And that this really is a smart move, build a housing, to accommodate the urbanization process.
Well, so people are being moved into the cities, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they can afford these apartments, which, cost $100,000 US or whatever. I mean, these are poor people moving into the cities, so they're building the wrong sort of apartments.
And what's worse, to build all these massive cities, they've had to tear down what was there before, clearing rice fields and displacing, by some counts, tens of millions of villagers. On the edge of Zhangzhou, Gilliam and I came upon a strange sight.
I'm just watching what they're doing. Do you have any idea?
I think they're trying to recycle the bricks.
These villagers are salvaging what's left of their homes, bulldozed to make room for more empty condos, already encroaching in the distance.
There are all these empty apartments over here. Can they conceivably move into those upscale places?
Most people in China live on about or less than $2 a day, and these apartments probably cost upwards of 50 or 60,000 US dollars, so very unlikely.
What will happen to them, do you think?
They'll be forced to relocate somewhere. I have no idea where they'll go.
These are the immediate casualties of the building boom. And there's another problem. Analysts warn that all this building has created a bubble that could burst.
So if the bubble bursts, who's left holding the bag?
There are multiple classes of people that are going to get wiped out by this. People who have invested 3 generations worth of savings, so grandparents, parents and children into properties, will see their savings evaporate. And then of course there's 50 million construction workers who are working on all these projects around China.
The prognosis of a bubble about to burst isn't only coming from financial gloom and doomers. We heard it from the most unlikely source.
Are you the biggest home builder in the world?
Yes, I think maybe.
Maybe.
Yes, only the quantity, not quality.
Wang Shi is modest, but his company, Vanke, is a $53 billion real estate empire building more homes than anyone in China. He was born on the front lines of communism and joined the Red Army, but he secretly read forbidden books about capitalism, so that when China liberalized its economy, he rushed to the front lines of the free market. Even he thinks today's situation is out of control.
Are homes in China too expensive today?
Yeah.
Here's a number that I saw. A typical apartment in Shanghai
Yeah.
costs about 45 times the average resident's annual salary.
Even higher. Even
What does
higher.
that mean for your economy if it's just too expensive for the vast majority of people to
So
buy?
I think that's dangerous.
Dangerous.
That's the bubble. So I think that's the problem.
Is there a bubble?
Yes, of course.
There is a bubble, and the issue is will it burst or not?
Yes.
That's the big
Yes.
issue.
If that's a bubble, that's a disaster.
If it bursts.
If bursts, that's disaster.
To try and prevent the disaster, the Chinese government decided to act. Heard of their one-child policy? Since 2011, China has had what amounts to a one-apartment policy, where it's very hard to buy more than one apartment in major cities. Because of this, prices plunged. The bubble was being tamed. And yet, the taming was creating all kinds of unintended consequences.
Are many developers in debt?
Yes.
And are many stopping development in the middle of projects because they don't have the money to go forward?
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a huge problem.
A problem because the slowing down of construction led to a downturn in the overall economy. Unfinished projects dot China, and not just apartment buildings.
Look at this. Can you believe it?
Analyst Ann Stevenson Yang, who has traveled across China, showed us a giant project, all but abandoned, in the port city of Tianjin, with concrete skeletons as far as the eye can see. The plan is to build a new financial district to rival Manhattan, including a Lincoln Center and a World Trade Center, only taller. But it all seems frozen.
There's supposed to be a Rockefeller Center here. I hope they have a Christmas tree, too. Skating rink.
City officials told us everything stopped because developers want to build all the facades at once to match. But on the ground, we heard a different explanation.
Workers told us that many of these buildings haven't had any work done on them for weeks, months, as if the developers just don't have the money to go on.
It's true. You see that happen first. The migrant workers will go home. That's often the first sign that the debt crisis is starting.
The debt crisis. When you stop paying your bills, then everything stops.
It could become a debt crisis because of the huge loans most of the developers took out. If they can't repay them, the whole economy will seize up. The government's great fear is that all this could lead to social unrest. And that's not hypothetical. Last year, when home prices fell, it infuriated all those owners of multiple dwellings who watched the value of their nest eggs plummet.
And there's already been some demonstrations over real estate around the country.
Yeah.
Have you had demonstrations against your showrooms anywhere? Your company?
Often.
So often, Wang Shi shudders to think what would happen if the bubble actually burst.
If that bubble breaking, that maybe, who knows what will happen. Maybe that maybe like the Arabic Spring.
Arabic Spring. You mean people coming out and demonstrating?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of economists say that it's too big for even this government to control.
I believe the top leaders have enough smart to deal with that.
You think you're praying, Major. You're going like that.
But that's uncertain.
Meanwhile, people who can afford it are still buying as much real estate as they can. They're even finding ways around the one-apartment restriction in big cities. Can't buy in Beijing? Just cross the city line, and the boom is in full swing. Flyers advertising new projects, potential buyers crowding buses to see new construction, and new owners line up to register their new apartment. Like us in our bubble, they just don't believe the good times will ever end.
Go to 60minutesovertime.com to hear what one of the richest women in China has to say about criticizing her government. Sponsored by Viagra.